My name is Marcelo Viana Neto. I'm a visiting assistant professor at University of Santa Cruz, California. And this is going to be a pretty fast-paced talk. I only have 30 minutes to talk about this really incredible course, so I'm just going to get to it. This is a session overview for you. I'm going to do a brief bio, talk about the course facts, so the basics, where the idea came from, since it's a sort of an experimental, unusual course. Syllabus and methodology. I'm going to show you some standout games, go into a little more detail on these games, talk about the results of this course, and then sort of make my point of why this matters and why thinking like this matters. So let's get to intros. This is where I'm from. I'm from Belo Horizonte, Brazil. I usually show this slide in almost all my talks because it surprises people that there's a city this big that you never heard about in Brazil. Yeah, it's large. It's great. Miss it. In 2002, I came to the US to study graphic design, and I've been here ever since. I spent about a decade or so as a graphic designer and art director. And in about 2010, I started making art for games and designing games myself. And I'm currently teaching at UC Santa Cruz, like I mentioned before, in the Art and Design, Games, and Playable Media program. So I teach courses in sort of a mix of graphic design and game design, digital sculpting, so kind of art tools, 3D art and 3D art production. This is one of the pieces that I'm currently working on. And this is another class that I teach, the one that I'm going to be focusing on. So the name for the course is actually Speculative Futures, Games for a Different World, slightly different from the name of the talk. So I've run this class twice before. I actually just finished the second run of it this past week. This is now finals week, but we don't actually do finals in this class. And it's been successful enough and sort of transformative enough that I wanted to, actually give a talk about it. So here's the course description, as you can find in our promotional materials for the students. So how do space exploration games play and look like without colonialism? What about sports games in a world free from gender normativity? First-person shooters in a world without war. And in this studio course, students will play, discuss, produce digital and analog games. They imagine a world in which major social justice challenges have been overcome. So the basics, it's an upper division elective in the Art and Design, Games, and Playable Media program at UCSC. The prereqs are foundational game design and games history courses, but we can usually kind of be flexible with that. It fulfills what we call a media creation elective, which we have a few in our program that allow students to kind of have some flexibility in their careers there. And it's a 10-week course. We are in the quarter system, and for everybody else that's also in the quarter system, I feel you. Yeah. So who takes this course? So it's about 20 to 25 students per quarter for this one particular course. The majority of them are going to be from our program, with some CS being computer science game design students. And it's a mix of juniors and seniors with some sophomores, but mostly juniors and seniors. Previous year was more juniors. This year, we got a few seniors in there. They have a wide range of technical skills, so it's not something that is a prerequisite for attending the course. And the majority of the students that take this course, and maybe you saw from the course description, are usually traditionally underrepresented. So people of color, non-male students, first generation, et cetera. The learning objectives for the course are a deeper understanding of how games communicate and generate concepts, better situate games in game design within contemporary social-political systems. This is where it starts to get different. Acquire can't say that word right now, and designing games that investigate pertinent questions of our present, and acquire broader games literacy and game design vocabulary. This is the space that I teach in. It's a privilege to teach there, sort of a kind of an open room with a lot of, everything's on wheels, so it's a really great place to teach in. So now let me get into the origins for this course and how it kind of came to be. I think this sort of defines it pretty well. So we, not only do our actual futures as human beings kind of look pretty bleak right now, if we're honest, but also the futures that we have in our games tend to be pretty bleak as well. So it's not only a games issue, I think it's a broad cultural issue that I don't have time to talk too much in depth about. But we used to imagine futures where there was space travel and a cure for cancer, instant meals, pills that became meals and stuff like that. And we're in a different space culturally right now. So that was in my head. And then this game came out. So when it was announced, I was pretty, excited about the possibility of what this game could do. But the reality, and I explain why, was a little different. So I think it's still a beautiful game. It's a technical marvel, and they created something that I think is really beautiful and does some really amazing things. But what you do in this game is basically this, right? Exploration, survival, combat, and trading. And sort of like extracting resources so that you can get better things to extract more resources, to then build more things so you can get more resources, and so on and so on and so on. You can also get better spaceships and so on, so that you can see more of the universe, but ultimately it's sort of this cycle. One thing that actually caught my eye and actually was my biggest disappointment, it was sort of the way that you interact with all these really interesting looking sentient species, which tend to be sort of around trading or sort of like one-way relationships. So in this case of this screenshot in particular, you're trading, discussing a sale, making an offer, sell items, buy items, everything. So the being itself sort of becomes a glorified trade menu. Other things that you can do in No Man's Sky, which I think is kind of important for this game, is that you can name everything you find. So to me, this is sort of like a playful reenactment of like a colonial fantasy of going to places that are uncharted before and kind of putting your stamp on it and saying, this is mine, I named it. I don't think I have to talk too much about how problematic that can be. I was thinking, right? So this game has this incredible algorithmic imagination, visual imagination, and so many things going for it, but the things that you do and how you relate to the characters in the game still feel kind of hampered by our cultural systems, right? So I was thinking, how come I, as the player, have authority to name this planet when there were, sentient beings in this planet already? So those questions were kind of rattling in my mind, and I think this kind of summarizes it. I think in a way. So we can imagine a quintillion different worlds, but we're still doing the same stuff in them. And that to me was a major, sort of disappointment. The other thing too is that in this game, you're basically trading and doing things sort of managed by this capitalist economic system that somehow occupies the entire galaxy. To me, this is kind of disturbing actually. I was thinking about this and then I started thinking about other games and thinking about futures in other games and how I don't want to pick on No Man's Sky in particular, so it happens everywhere. So you see in these games that I'm showing here right now, I think the same issues are replicated, and it seems to be a recurring theme. If we're not doing futures that are like space exploration futures or sci-fi, we're doing post-apocalyptic futures, places that the Earth has been changed in a major way or even destroyed. They're probably, I'm not sure if that's how they thought about it, but they're usually sort of allegory for our fears. In this case, I think many of these are related to climate catastrophe. And if I'm paraphrasing Frederick Jameson, it is easier for us to imagine the end of the world than a better world. And I think this is very, very true in video games. I think we're in a rut, and I'm hoping for more, beautiful views of the futures like we had decades ago. And I think that this sort of rut has actually pretty real consequences in our lives outside of video games. So, and I had this question in my mind. So what if we begin by imagining a better future and then design games for it? Like, what would that do? Actually, not just better futures, but actual possible futures, realizable futures. What kinds of games would we make? What kind of games would our students make? And would that have any ramification for their own lives and our lives, right? So that was the question that kind of was in my mind when I designed this course. So let's get into it, the actual class. Oh, by the way, you're going to see some images in the back of these slides. They're from a game that came out of this course. This is Ecopolis by Annabelle Malcolm Pugh, Jacob Levine, and Margaret Patrick. We'll talk more about that later. So this course is actually built, before we even talk about the syllabus, there's 3 major pillars that need to be in place for everything else to happen. So the way that I'm describing them is self-efficacy, autonomy, and prefiguration. So self-efficacy. The argument here is that to imagine a different future, students must believe in their already existing potential for creative imagination and work within a structure that breeds confidence. So proper scaffolding for this to happen is really important. Autonomy. To believe in their vision, they must design it from their own passions, lived experiences, aspirations. So I think that if the instructor has too heavy of a hand in controlling the direction of these futures, the futures are not theirs anymore, and it starts to become the instructor's future. So you have to be careful with how you intercede. So more of a mentor and a guide rather than a director. Prefiguration. To own these futures, they must live and work as if it's already here. So this is a little bit more weird one. So what I mean by this is sort of like we have to create a classroom environment and culture that mirrors the future that they want to live in. And the reason for that is because if you go outside of the classroom into the world is pulling them in different directions that are not consistent with this sort of mindset to create this imaginative future. So if the classroom can be a microcosm of that, I think it creates the right environment. To do that, we start with a sort of list of class values that we compile together, me together with the students. So you can see some of them from about a year ago. These are from this current year. So these are values that we want to see represented in the class. And then we bring this up throughout the quarter to remind ourselves to see if we're actually working consistently with these values. So this sets the stage. It's a simple exercise, but sort of just sets the stage for what happens next. So the course structure. So this class is split into 3 phases. There's a research phase, a prototyping phase, and a production phase. About 2 weeks for the first 2 and 6 for the third. Research actually happens throughout the quarter. It's not just happens in the beginning and you let go of it, but that's where it's mostly concentrated. Although it is a game design course, we spend a lot of time reading things and discussing ideas. So this is a sample of some of the course readings here. We read stuff on utopia and the future, the classic Do Artifacts Have Politics, and a few other ones. One thing that we do differently here is that at some point I personally assign each group of students readings from this library that I've been building for the last 3 years for this course. And those are particular to their research topic. And I also have an assignment in which they have to assign themselves further reading based on the stuff that they've read in the class so far. So this is not in the syllabus, this is just kind of an exercise in a way for them to do their own research. I also have a library of what I'm calling strange games to sort of like destabilize the idea of what games are and can do, so they can have some inspiration that way too. Another way to look at the course structure is thinking of it in sort of like a more temporal way. So there's present, transition, and future. So in the present is where most of the research is concentrated. We have a moment of transition that transitions us from present to future. And during the future, we'll continue to do research, prototyping, actually producing the games they're going to produce. So I'm going to talk about all of these 3. So in the present, we're learning about today. We're learning about what are the systems and the ways of thinking that control the way that we do things today. In the transition phase, we have a few exercises that move them between from present to future. And in the future, like I mentioned, that's kind of the bulk of the class, is where they actually create their features and execute on them. So going back to the present again, so the present research phase, we have 2 major components, which is definitions and presentations. For the definitions, it's a class exercise to identify and define major economic and social political systems. Yes, this is a game design class. And then we'll create a shared Google Doc to collect findings for future reference. So the goals of this is to create a shared vocabulary, start to create class cohesion, develop self-efficacy. So the first point, create a shared vocabulary. We're covering a broad amount of topics here, right? And the goal here is not to be perfect, but to at least kind of understand what we're talking about. Somebody says capitalism, like what is that? And we have to kind of start understanding each other. So that's the goal for this definitions phase. So here's some of the words that we compiled. In the first year, we got into a lot of issues instead of systems, so we put those down as well. I'm moving fast. If you want those slides later, you can always ask me for them. One great one that came out of the first year was chrononormativity, which is the idea that our lives need to unfold in a certain, pattern where you have to, at a certain age you should, be in college, certain ages should be married, certain ages should have kids, and so on. It's a feminist concept. I didn't know about this concept before, and I learned about this for my students. This is the one from this year. You're going to see a lot of gaps because we did a lot of consolidation. And also this huge gap here for gender and sexuality, because there were a lot of items in there, and we were like, oh my God, there's too much in here. So we just got rid of all the specificity and just kind of created an umbrella term, and it went from there. This is our Google Doc where we start to define things. This is open sort of collaboration. Just quickly define these terms just so we understand what we're talking about. I love this last one in there. These are obviously not supposed to be perfect and exhaustive. It's just sort of creating that vocabulary. And then we go into a presentation phase where they get into groups and present on specific topics to the rest of the class. This is great because it's sort of like a way for students to teach each other about these, sort of understand that they already know a lot about this stuff, and start to get more familiar with each other with an eye towards final group formation. And some really great presentations came out of this, and I took a photo of this board because I thought that was so good. Like they started over here and start to migrate over there. It's like shows real thinking and kind of working out of the problem. The other thing that happens in these presentations is they also design a simple game that can be played in the classroom to sort of explain what that system does and how it affects people. So I think those are also really successful. Some of the presentation topics: patriarchy, racism, neoliberalism, ethnocentrism, anthropocentrism, classism, ableism, and there's plenty more. But this gives you an idea. Okay, let's go to transition phase. So this is a quick one. So we have, my favorite exercise from this phase is the boss battle. So what we do in this exercise is I ask them to design a classic video game boss battle in which the boss is a physical manifestation of their topic of research. And then the boss also has minions, like every social political system has many sort of subordinate systems. So also design those minions and create the abilities that correspond to those. And it's great because it's sort of like a way to sort of defeat the thing that you're rallying against at the in the transition phase. And you go like, okay, we beat patriarchy, so what would we do now, right? If only. So here's an example of boss and minions for ethnocentrism. I like the boss one. One of the abilities of the boss is speak English. So it tells people to speak English. Just some photos. So the boss entity is, like I said, a physical manifestation that they actually have to design and kind of draw it and create the abilities for it. I believe this one is colonialism. And this one was gender. So I'm pretty sure the players were able to defeat gender in this one. Okay, so now future. So this is, like I said, the bulk of the course here. So we're also do a reading on utopic thinking and what the concept of utopia, speculative design. There's some sort of fiction too, excerpts from books like The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin that we look into. So to kind of have an idea on how to create these things and how far we can go. And it sort of has these four components: the future creation, where they actually create their future. We do group formation, which is a really important part of this course, game proposal, and the group charter. So the future, the way that I define this assignment is they have to describe their desired future, and this future is a system, a future in which their topic of research has either been replaced to something better or completely eradicated. And then they describe, actual things that exist in that future, like cities, work, relationships, schools, etc. And they have to, the goal here is to sort of understand that if you change something that major, the entire world changes, right? So not just, there's no patriarchy, so, men are not on top anymore. It's like, okay, then what? What happens after that, right? So we have to imagine what happens after that. And I kind of like to talk about this using this great paper by Paul Colton, Dan Burnett, and Adrian Gradinar. that kind of explains a little bit of the idea of speculative design for games, and in particular, the kinds of futures that we are talking about when we say speculative futures. So in this graph, for instance, the impossible range of the spectrum is more sort of like sci-fi and fantasy, so stuff that can't happen. And probable at the bottom is like, maybe we shouldn't think about that, especially not with the latest science. So we stick within the possible and plausible. So those are things that we can actually get in our lifetime. They're a little bit more, a lot more difficult than staying within the probable realm. And again, remembering that this is stuff that we actually want, right? Not just like, because otherwise it can go into post-apocalyptic really fast. Group formation is really important in this course, like I mentioned. We don't do, in my opinion, a very good job at doing group formation in our schools, so I think I try to experiment with that and see how I can do it a little better. So we spent a lot of time in the class trying to do this. We share a Google Doc so that students post their interests, game ideas, and skills, so that's the first step. But we also they themselves design activities to get to know about each other, also get to know about their ideas. And so it's not just that the activity does that, it's the process of designing the activity also creates possibilities for group formation, getting to know each other. And then we form groups based on affinity and skill set matches. So not just either random or because we're friends, but because we want to make the same things or we care about the same things. And look, like I want to focus on programming, you want to focus on art, let's join together. And I think this works pretty well for the most part. It's always challenging to form groups. And then they go into game proposal. So groups at that point are formed, they create a shared vision of the future, they propose an idea for a game, apparently, analog or digital. And that game, the important part here is that game, through its mechanics and audiovisual components, it must embody the ethos and social political structures of their future. So it's not necessarily a depiction of that future, but it just has to be inspired by that future. So you see what I mean in a second when I start showing you the games. They go on to kind of understand, what it is that they want to design, and the values that they want in their game, what they want to represent. And it's a pretty challenging part, but it's a good one. And then they create a group charter, which I think is also important. Going back to that idea of prefiguration, this is, I keep going back to this, like the way that we do work in the class needs to be consistent with the idea of the futures that we're creating. So they create a list of values for their group and then derive a lot of the way that they work together, the hierarchy, et cetera, from that value list. We go into a couple of weeks of prototyping, and then 5 weeks of studio time with weekly playtests later. You get some games. So this is the first one I'm going to show you. So this is Dinner for Two by Ari Liu and Athene Yip. So this one is a dinner game, and all the rules are in the form of a menu, and it's supposed to get two people that have never met each other to go into this space as if they're going to dinner together, go through the menu and do the activities described in the menu, and with the hopes that in the end they'll get closer. And I think it worked out pretty well. This is The Parade by Reshma Zachariah, and it is a game that lets you play as this cloak character, exchanging masks with individuals around you. And the interesting thing about this game is that Reshma started with research on gender as performance. So that was the idea of masks. That's where that came in. And then she ended up designing a game that was meant as a metaphor for the journey to the spirit world and transcending our corporeal selves. So again, this is not a literal interpretation of the future, but the seed was in that future. The other great thing about this game is she did it in 2 weeks because she changed her idea so many times. This is Just Another Day. It's a Twine game that was created this quarter by Ethan Chung and Derek Jean. It's sort of a computer AI simulator done in Twine that's supposed to be an AI assistant for children in the future. So they imagine they created their future and stuff, and then they created this assistant that would help children in the future navigate difficult situations that they might encounter in their lives with the assistant of this AI, and sort of guide them as a sort of like a rehearsal for real life. So they did some really interesting things with this game. This is Games for Young Citizens of the New World Order by Austin Bragger, Daniel Wright, and Griffin Fay. It's a box set of activities that young people would get in their imagined future to help teach them values of the times. This was inspired by a sort of post-war Germany bundle of design objects that was supposed to educate young folks on what is good design and how to navigate sort of the capitalist, world to come. So they used that as inspiration. They created this box set, and it's a collection of activities, a bunch of games that you can play, and they're supposed to foster cooperation and the values of their future. The images that you've been seeing in my slides in the background are from Ecopolis by Annabelle Malcolm-Pugh, Jacob Levine, and Margaret Patrick. And it's a game in which they were researching anthropocentrism, and they wanted to create a game in which you sort of inhabited the consciousness of various creatures and even inanimate objects, but then saw the world as if you were those creatures. So they created completely different worlds for each creature, and each, like the moon, there's one is the moon, there's a fish and a wolf and a bunch of other stuff, a tree, and it's beautiful. And they created sort of this collage art style. And kind of displayed it in this mini installation. So now I'm going to get into some case studies of some standout games that came out of the last 2 years. So the first one is Just Be Happier by Roy Kramer. Roy's research interests were mental health stigma, holistic treatment and management of mental illness, connection between mental health and neoliberalism. And the outline for his future was everyone gets a mentor throughout their life. Jobs and schools are designed to be a community of thinkers. Complete isolation is discouraged, and for demanding, stressful professions, work can be done at a slower, more healthier pace. He created this sort of like simplified Sims game where you are in this tiny little room. And the interesting thing about this game is that it has a present, like how things are in the present, and there has a future transition. So you're looking at here is the present. And what he was trying to do with this is everything in this game, so you see the huge, progress bars there, cash, the number is like pretty clear on your screen. There's time, there's lots of numbers and sliders and things like that, because he was trying to make the connection between sort of like the reification of everything that is, human, and how that affects mental health. So you go in the game, you have to do a bunch of activities, and at the same time you have to manage all these little sliders going up and down. And you also have a sort of an internal dialogue that goes on in the little text box. At some point you reach a threshold in the game where you can call for help, and when you call for help, you transition into the future. So then you go into this very, very different world where it's sort of like open and you can walk around. And you eventually find your mentor, and they help you. You can ask them questions and figure out, where you can go next and everything. And this transition is pretty stark, and it was his way of saying, okay, the way that we have it right now is constraining. Everything needs to be managed, then some numbers put on everything. I want something, that is more about the human connection. That's how he ended up designing the game. So, the grass smells nice. I love the feeling down on my back. And then he asks his questions. Why aren't you working right now? And then the NPC responds, I'd love to, but the wait list is full right now. Plus, we have everyone fed. Maybe I'll grow some flowers. Okay, next up is Meet Me in the Garden, a puzzle game for platonic intimacy, or a cooperative puzzle-based narrative building game that encourages genuine connection between players. So this is the team: Liam, Caleb, Reno, Yanni, and Emily. Reno's right here. Meet Me in the Garden had as research interests between all the members: patriarchy, queerness, feminism, installation art, intrinsic motivation, and cooperation. And here's their future outline. It's a non-hierarchical, egalitarian society where exploitation and appropriation is replaced by collaboration and shared creation, where people express what they want to express and are unafraid to form genuine relationships. No unequal power dynamics, and everyone acknowledges everyone as equal. It is a split-screen game where there's two players playing on the same screen. On the left side and the right side, they're trying to collaborate to solve puzzles, but they cannot see each other's screens. There's a physical divider on the screen that prevents you from seeing it. You're going to see in the future slides. So after the complete puzzles, they complete a level, they go into this reflection phase where the game starts to talk to the players and ask the players to start talking to each other and doing different things. So for instance, sort of relaying what they just went through to each other, or create a story together using a set of Post-its, and so on. And this is what their installation looked like on the final day. Another cool thing about this game is that they actually got to go to E3 to show this game, part of the Indicate showcase. So that was pretty fantastic. And they sort of created the whole installation there too. I was going to show you the video, but we don't have time, so we'll keep going. Next time is Dinosaurly by Joyce, Lynn, and Fan Swenson. So Dinosaurly is a queer dinosaur game about found family and affection with hugging, planting flowers, and stickers. So their research interests were queerness, queer game design, gender, feminism, patriarchy, and their future outline was fully automated luxury gay space communism, no chrono or gender normativity, platonic intimacy is normalized, no death, freedom, choice, and cuteness, plus more. It kind of looks like this. I'm actually going to have to play a video of this one because I think it is better explained through a video. So let's see if this is going to work. Oh, there you go. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the results of this class. I'm out of time, so I'm going to run through this. So I think there's lots of advantages of starting with future thinking. It begins to ask students to imagine the future first, so the games that they're designing from the outset are supposed to not have been designed yet. Also has some built-in constraints, which is really useful. Positions games as cultural artifacts, so that's also a great portion of this. Some challenges, because this is a pretty challenging course, so individual attention and the range of topics actually create a really big demand on instructor time. It's very, very satisfying and enriching, but it's also real. You have to think about that. The unusual course structure and expectation of self-motivation can make some students uneasy, and the quarter system is brutal. I talked about that, so it's real too. So that limited the scope and polish of the games. Some successes, we saw a broad range of gameplay experiences and highly imaginative artwork. I did not show you all the games, obviously, but I think you saw from that the range that we get. It's a very short amount of time, too. There were many strong portfolio pieces for students. This is always good. Peer-to-peer learning was actually a really, really successful way to cover a very wide variety of topics. And we saw very high student self-motivation, positive classroom environment, and long-lasting communities. So some of these folks are still really, really close, and I think this is a great outcome of courses that I don't think we should downplay. I asked students if they wanted to say a few words, and I'm going to show you a few things that they said. So looking back on it, this is Reshma Zakaria. Looking back on it, what we made is an incredible portfolio piece because it puts ourselves, our opinions, thoughts, and ideas to the forefront of our work. Roy said, this was a class that where I felt my opinions mattered. In other words, in other classes, the personal touch is more of an afterthought. Even in most writing art classes I've taken, the focus is more on how to most convincingly argue an idea instead of what ideas you actually have. Joyce Lynn said, encouraging us to be better to each other as if we're already living those futures so that we create our own better futures is, I feel like that really happened. Just the idea of making different games so that we can create better futures is an idea that stuck with me. It's what I want to do with my career. Emily said, this class was the best part of my college career. It changed the way that I think about the world, the way that I interact with people every day. This class made me a better person, artist, and friend. And finally, Caleb, it taught me to look past the bleak circumstances that we find ourselves in, but not to ignore them. It taught me not to imagine an idyllic utopia, but to embody a real and actual, a weird and queer, a colorful and expected, a loving and vulnerable, an intersectional and multidimensional future. It taught me that such a future is possible at all. So I'm out of time, so I'm not going to do my closing remarks. Thank you.